Welcome to Film Forum Presents, a podcast featuring special live events recorded at our theater located at 209 West Houston Street in downtown Manhattan. In this episode, Film Forum presents filmmaker Paweł Pawlikowski, who appeared for a Q&A following a screening of his movie Cold War on January 6, 2019. The Q&A was moderated by Film Forum's Theater Operations and Events Manager, Joseph Berger. Cold War is nominated for 3 2019 Academy Awards: Best Foreign Language Film, Best Cinematography, and Best Director.
Good evening, folks. Thanks very much for coming to Film Forum tonight. My name is Joseph Berger. I'm the Theater Operations and Events Manager here at the theater. And tonight we're thrilled to welcome filmmaker Paweł Pawlikowski after a screening of his most recent feature, Cold War. Film Forum has long championed Mr. Pawlikowski's films in the past, having premiered his second feature, Last Resort, in 2001, and 2014's Ida, which went on to become Poland's first entry to win the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. Cold War premiered in competition at last year's Cannes Film Festival, where it won the Best Director prize. It was recently shortlisted for Best Foreign Language Film for the upcoming Academy Awards. Mr. Pawlikowski is in town this week to receive his awards for Best Foreign Language Film from both the New York Film Critics Circle tomorrow evening and the National Board of Review on Tuesday evening. And he has very graciously agreed to join us tonight for a post-screening discussion about Cold War. I encourage all of you to stick around. Enjoy. Welcome to Film Forum.
Thank you for having me.
This is your first...
It's a wonderfully narrow room, which is very good for this narrow film. I think it's the right home for it.
Narrow in shape.
Yeah, not in scope.
Not in narrative scope. Well, this film was dedicated to your parents. So I'd love to tell the audience a little bit about why you dedicated this film to your parents and what these two characters... or who these two characters are based on.
Well, as your question implies, they're based on my parents, but it's not just about that. It's the world of my parents. You know, I wasn't around at the time, you know, the late 40s, 50s, so I know it through my parents. They were my key to it, in a way, but also they were the emotional engine for the film. They had a very similar relationship, which was full of twists and turns and betrayals and marrying other people and leaving the country and marrying each other and splitting up again and then finishing more or less like they did in film. So it's very much overshadowed by their story. At the same time, it's a very different story. You know, in order to actually tell a story, you have to kind of forget about the reality of a thing and just kind of treat it as material that you can play with. But the world, the mood of the character of the relationship is very much there, and it informs the story.
Were they artists, your parents?
My mother was a ballet dancer, but my father wasn't an artist. They were just a disastrous couple, you know. That's and they were both like protagonists in their story. They were both kind of strong, attractive individuals who, at the beginning, he was 10 years older, so at the beginning he was the authority, and very quickly lost the authority. And there was a kind of just a lot of power struggle and a lot of serious love, but also just inability to be calm and just to be together.
Well, they were a disastrous couple, but they lived in a disastrous time. And I presume they moved around a lot out of necessity.
Yes, they did. Yes, that's true. They left the country separately. My father left for political reasons. My mother married an English guy, so she ended up living in London for practical reasons. I mean, she's an Anglophile as well, but yes, I mean, and living under Stalinism didn't make it easy. There was constant pressure, you know, everything, nothing was innocent. You know, everything you did had a kind of extra consequences and subtext. So it didn't make it easy at all. And they came from totally different worlds. And then living abroad, when they finally got together abroad again, suddenly they were different people. You know, being in exile makes you slightly behave differently. You have to kind of redefine yourself. Your relationship changes as well. You know, my father wasn't quite the same guy he was in Poland, and she was different as well. So yes, so the fact that there was a kind of instability and changes and constant pressure from, well, politically, but also just exile, it did impact on the relationship. Yeah.
Fascinating that you say that, because in this film, every chapter, we see them in a different milieu, and they're almost different people. The disastrous relationship remains the same, but they're living amongst different circumstances, and the characters change and fluctuate sort of wildly. So it's quite a ride that you take us on. Did you go to Britain with your mother when she remarried?
I did, yes. I was 14 at the time, and I didn't realize that she got married, so I kind of went to Britain, and I thought we're going on holiday, and it turned out we're not coming back. Yes, there were all these jumps in our lives.
And you must have had I mean, again, I'm making presumption here, but a more cultural experience growing up in your teens in Britain. Were you exposed to more film then at that time and music?
Well, in Britain at the time, I didn't speak a word of English, so it wasn't very cultural. I was just kind of trying to, and I was an angry teenager, angry for many reasons. I was 14, so I was into rock and roll, so that made it easier. And when I discovered I'm going to Britain, for holiday, I was very excited because I grew up on, the Beatles, the Mods, Kings, Small Faces, So for me, it was and that was the bridge to British culture. It was pop music, rock music. But at the same time, I didn't speak a word of English, and I felt like a complete moron. So it was just, very, very traumatic experience.
You must have learned eventually, though, because you had quite a successful career in the 80s making documentaries for the BBC.
Yes, then I went to live in Germany for 3 years with my father, who by then kind of started a career. So I kind of found my feet there. I didn't speak German either, but it was more similar to Poland in some ways. And then I went back to London, which was a great country. Country. It is a country, London. It's like a perfect home for people with no home. So yes, and then I kind of made that my home and studied all sorts of other things, literature, philosophy, making photographs and playing music, and then tried all sorts of things, and finally, they all led to cinema.
I wanted to ask about your relationship to music, not just in your films, but personally. I reviewed both Ida and Cold War today, and it's such a stark contrast with how music is used. In Ida, it's almost totally absent from the film, other than the moments with the saxophonist. And in this film, it's almost throughout the film. So what is your personal relationship with music? You said you studied...
Well, I didn't study it as such. I played it a lot. It was to start with rock and roll and jazz, but I love all sorts of music. Well, in Ida, music is quite important too, because there is the Coltrane is quite a big presence, and kind of cheesy pop music. Whereas here, because it's set in the world of it's a folk ensemble. Once I accepted that took that as a framing device in the story, that gave me the license to really do all sorts of things with music. And my heroes here are musicians, so I could really go in every direction. From kind of authentic source music to this kind of fake lore, the state-sponsored folklore. Then jazz and pop music, like a cheesy pop in the 60s. So I had kind of a whole spread of musics here, and I tried to work from the same material. There's like 3 tunes that keep cropping up in different shapes. So music became a proper character in this film. In Ida, it was more punctual. Another character of the film, which we just talked about outside, is the aspect ratio that you use. If anyone here knows a little bit about that, it's he uses a proper 1:3:3 aspect ratio, which is an old Hollywood ratio. It's a square ratio. And you did that here, and you did that in Ida. It makes for beautiful compositions, and it's a very bold choice, both as a filmmaker, but also as an audience member. We don't really see that. It works perfectly in this narrow room. And this film really reminds me a lot of old Hollywood, not just in the story of the rise of a girl from the wrong side of the tracks to become, a cabaret ingenue. Joanna Kulig, she reminds me so much of Marlene Dietrich and Lauren Bacall and Claudette Colbert. Marilyn Monroe. Yes, Marilyn Monroe. So I just wonder about your connection to old Hollywood and Hollywood films, and if that influenced this at all. No, the aspect ratio wasn't really out of nostalgia. It was more like the right, I like, Ida was the same. I like composing in square. And I used to make documentaries on 16mm, which was kind of similar. And it was not an eccentric format, it's quite a good one, and then you can build much more in depth, and also it's very good for portraits, for double portraits. You can really guide where people are looking when you then move the camera. So it was just when you start a film, you kind of just follow your intuition, what's going to be good, what's going to work. It's not like I want it to be like some other films, it's more what works for this film. And I think it gives you a certain concentration to be so narrow. But you can create a kind of horizon in depth, you can, especially if you put the camera higher and you kind of have layers and layers. So it just felt natural.
Did it feel natural right away to shoot this in black and white, or was that a choice that you made a little later on in the development of this film?
No, it was the immediate choice. But then my DP friend Łukasz said, "Oh, it's so embarrassing to do another one in black and white." So then we spent thinking, okay, what if we did it in color? What sort of color would it be? And then by elimination, we realized that it didn't make sense in color. I mean, for one thing, Poland wasn't very, very colorful in the 50s. And if you use the color, there was a certain type of Polish or Soviet Technicolor with kind of washed out greens and reds, and that was kind of interesting. Or Orwo, the East German stock. We could have approximated that, but that would have felt much more arbitrary and contrived than doing it in black and white, which felt very just natural and straightforward, a kind of straightforward deal with the audience, It's clear the world isn't black and white, but that world was black and white.
Can we talk a little bit about Joanna Kulig? She's phenomenal in this. And I know she worked with you twice before in smaller roles. Was this written for her or with her in mind? How did you approach her?
No, I wrote it without her in mind, but every now and again I thought, oh God, she'd be great doing this. And then usually whenever you invent a story, you think, but will I ever find the actors to do it? With this one, I knew I had at the back of my head that I have an actress who can do it. She's not exactly the right age as I'd imagine the heroine, but we can kind of swing it. And she definitely has the right temperament and when she can sing. So throughout the writing, I kept imagining that, how she'd do a particular scene, and I could see that she could do most of them. I wasn't sure she could do all the facets of the character, but then that's the process, that I knew that with time we'll get there.
I guess it helped that she's a great singer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful
and then
singer.
She's a great creature. I mean, she's a great character. She's a great person to work with. She's just very generous. Gives a lot to the process.
We don't have too much time left, but your parents moved around a lot. But I also, from what I understand, you've moved around a lot as well. So I just wonder if you were able to explore some of that in this film. Your own experiences moving from Poland to Britain to Paris, I believe, and now you're back in Warsaw.
I'm sure I have, yes. and this kind of feeling of Paris, the salon life, and I definitely experienced something analogous. Yes, for sure. And the way you have to kind of adapt in a different country and a way, not speaking the language, not knowing the rules of the game, how that affects your behavior. Of course, most people who've moved around know it. So I'm sure there's a lot of that in it. Yeah.
Well, we are very grateful that you're here with us in New York, and enjoy the next few days and receiving your very, very well-deserved awards. So again, a round of applause for our guest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Film Forum Presents. Special thanks to Amazon Studios for making this event possible. If you like what you just heard, please be sure to subscribe to get future episodes and rate and review so that more movie lovers can find us. Film Forum is an independent nonprofit cinema, and our doors have been kept open for nearly 50 years thanks to the invaluable support of our members and donors. Please visit www.filmforum.org for details on membership, as well as information and showtimes for our current programming. See you at the movies.